Friendly fire. Tonight, outrage on the streets.
He was trying to apprehend the guy who was breaking into his car.
Meanwhile, new details about the victim's surface.
His wife's father is a police officer.
Tonight, an entire community is reacting after the shooting of an NYPD officer. And it's first at 10 tonight. Good Friday evening to you. I'm Derry Alexander.
I'm Ernie Anastas. Tonight we are learning more about what may have happened in the moments just before the deadly shooting.
Our team coverage begins with Tiwa Chang in East Harlem. And Tiwa, what have you learned tonight?
Ernie and Derry were outside the 25th Police Precinct House, where investigators continue to question the thief who allegedly started this entire process that led to one cop killing another. We have learned from sources some interesting information about what happened at the time of the shooting. Initially, investigators believed that the officer who was shot and killed was running after a suspect when he was shot by the other police officer. Now they believe he was in fact collaring a suspect, actually leaning over him with his gun, trying to arrest him when the other officers came up. Last night around 10:30, rookie housing cop Omar Edwards got off duty on East 124th Street in Harlem. Police say a man was inside the officer's car rifling through it. Officer Edwards chased the suspect, identified by police as Miguel Santiago, to 125th Street. A police anti-crime unit in an unmarked car was driving by, saw Officer Edwards in plainclothes with a gun holding down another man. The other officers stopped.
One of the officers, after exiting the vehicle, fired 6 times from his 9mm Glock, striking Officer Edwards twice.
Police initially said Officer Edwards was shot in the chest, but witnesses disagree.
Yeah, his back was turned. He got shot in the back. He wasn't facing towards the officer. He wasn't facing the officer. He had his back turned, ready to... He was trying to apprehend the guy who was breaking into his car.
The medical examiner's autopsy supports the witnesses. The autopsy concludes Officer Edwards was shot in his mid-left back. The bullet hit his heart and lodged in his chest. A second bullet hit his left arm, and a third bullet hit his left hip. Reverend Sharpton wants a federal investigation.
I think the federal government has to really step in and say, is there a pattern where at the scene of a crime or an alleged crime, a black cop is assumed to be the suspect?
This is where Officer Edwards was shot to death by Officer Dunton, 125th Street between 1st and 2nd Avenues. You can see it's not residential. It's basically the on and off ramps to the old Triborough Bridge. And it's pretty noisy here, too. Not a lot of people either. So if it's important to know whether Officer Dunton shouted, "Stop police," before he shot and killed Officer Edwards, it's going to be hard to find anyone to prove or disprove that. But sources say the alleged thief, Santiago, says he heard Officer Dunton say, "Drop the gun."
Rest assured, we will find out exactly what happened here, see what we can learn from it, so it may never happen again.
Because Officer Edwards was black and Officer Dunton is white, a number of black officers have said they are again afraid that whenever they're not clearly identified, that white officers mistake them for criminals.
Like everyone on this block knew Officer Edwards, and they all say that he was a hero. Tonight, many of them stopping by the family's house to pay their final respects, including Police Commissioner Ray Kelly.
I can't believe it. I don't know what to say.
Officer Omar Edwards' father remains in shock. His son, just 25 years old, is dead, killed doing what he always wanted to do, serving as a New York City police officer.
He always wanted to be a police officer from he was small. That was his dream.
Today, the officer's family, his friends, and his neighbors are remembering the young man they all say was a hero in this neighborhood.
It shouldn't have happened to him. That was one of the cops they should have had around, because it shouldn't have happened to him. He got 2 kids. He got a wife.
The officer's mother and wife of just 1 month have stayed behind closed doors today. This neighbor tells me that the officer's mother shared the shocking news with him early this morning.
She's taking it pretty hard, you know. The dad, of course, is also taking it very hard, and everybody's in the building, I guess, you know, it's very sad.
Outside the officer's home, candles colored blue and white burned tonight, a tribute to the colors he so proudly wore. In fact, friends tell me his goal was to one day be the city's top cop. In a sad irony, the police commissioner tonight visited the officer's family.
Now, I just express condolences. It's a terrible tragedy. I spoke to the officer's mother, and I also spoke to his wife and also his father-in-law.
The officer leaves behind 2 sons, aged 7 months and 1.5 years old.
Questions of racism. We have team coverage. We begin with Paisley Chang live in East Harlem, where it all went down 24 hours ago. Paisley?
And Sue, it was around this time last night that Officer Edwards left work. He had taken off his uniform and changed into street clothes. He had also taken off his bulletproof vest. After all, he was on his way home to be with his family. How could he have possibly known that just a few hundred feet away, he would need that bulletproof vest to protect himself from the gun of a fellow officer? Flowers and bunting graced the front of the Housing Bureau station at which Officer Omar Edwards worked. The young officer was gunned down in a violent confrontation just as he was leaving work.
All we can say at this point is that he was there protecting the rest of us. We will find out what happened, and our prayers are with the family.
It was around 10:30 at night. Edwards was walking to his car when he saw someone, now identified as Miguel Santiago, breaking into it. Detectives say Edwards moved to confront Santiago and grabbed him, but Santiago got free by wriggling out of his shirt.
We believe that at this point, Officer Edwards, with his gun drawn, chased the individual north on 2nd Avenue to 125th Street and east on 125th Street towards First Avenue.
At that exact moment, an unmarked car with plainclothes officers was across the street, who saw a man being chased by another man with a gun. Wearing their badges, police say the officers got out of the car and identified themselves. But detectives say Edwards turned with the gun in his hand, and one officer fired 6 times from his 9mm gun, striking Edwards twice.
My heart dropped. I just said no, I didn't want to believe it, because I just felt that this guy was a real good guy, that this shouldn't have happened to him.
On the social networking site Facebook, there are already tributes to Edwards. His friends say even in high school, Edwards talked about being a police officer. In this time of extreme grief, Edwards' father shared some fond memories of his son.
He was a wonderful, wonderful child. For me, he was small. For me, he was a baby. He was wonderful.
Edwards leaves behind his wife and their 2 young children. Reverend Al Sharpton has already called for a federal investigation into this shooting death. And tomorrow morning, he and other community leaders and activists will hold a vigil at the very spot where Officer Edwards was killed.
School yearbook picture. Dunton is 30 years old. He's been on the force for 4.5 years. Today, the officer's parents, Tom and Fran Dunton, did not have any comments for reporters as Suffolk County Police escorted them from their home in Medford.
With 15 feet separating them, did Officer Dunton fear he was in a kill or be killed situation when he opened fire on Edwards? What do police guidelines say? Jonathan Deeds continues our coverage with more on those questions.
Some are asking whether the friendly fire shooting of off-duty Officer Omar Edwards was more than a tragic accident, whether race had any role. The Reverend Al Sharpton earlier.
We don't know what happened. But the question now becomes, can the police police themselves?
This case comes after last year's shooting in White Plains, where a black off-duty officer was shot by officers of varying races. Back in 1994, the shooting of Officer Desmond Robinson by Peter Del Debbio led to cries of reform and improved training within the NYPD. State Senator Eric Adams once ran the activist group 100 Blacks in Law Enforcement.
Because if you ignore the fact that we have racial predispositions, then you are not going to train a proper police officer how to police in that environment.
Other recent cases of friendly fire have taken place where the races of the officers were the same. The Bronx White Castle shooting in 2006 involved Hispanic officers. And in Reddington, New Jersey, an FBI agent accidentally shot and killed another. Both were white. In this case, Edmonds in plainclothes was chasing a suspect with gun drawn when he encountered the plainclothes officers. Police say he was ordered to freeze, but investigators say he was turning towards the officers when one opened fire. NYPD guidelines remind off-duty officers when confronted by fellow cops, do not turn body, especially if holding a firearm. Pat Donnelly is a longtime firearms instructor.
He just got off of a shift. He's a police officer. He's doing what he's been trained to do. Unfortunately, it appears that he didn't follow proper protocol in this situation, and it unfortunately cost him his life.
The autopsy concludes Officer Edwards was shot in his mid-left back. The bullet hit his heart and lodged in his chest. A second bullet hit his left arm and a
Unfortunately, It appears that he didn't follow proper protocol in this situation, and it unfortunately cost him his life.